Hey everybody, and welcome to Pedal-Powered Anthropology's Introduction to Archaeology. If you watched my previous video introducing anthropology as a whole, you already know that archaeologists study the material and biological remains of human societies. And that doesn't have to be ancient societies, it doesn't have to be distant past at all. It could be sort of a mid-20th century building with sort of peculiar architecture, or it could be the remains of a music festival that happened 2 weeks ago. The only real criteria to make something archaeological is it has to be related in a material sense to humans, and you have to be curious about it. If you want to know the function of something, fair game for archaeology. And archaeology is a particularly fascinating field for me, not just because what archaeologists themselves study, but also because of sort of the popular perception of archaeology. I mean, people are really excited about it. I mean, it's a window into our own past. It's how we can understand our ancestors. It's the pyramids, it's hieroglyphic, and it's trekking through the jungle and finding Machu Picchu. You don't have to understand why somebody made something or how it was used in the time it was made. You still feel a connection to the society that made it. You feel that humanity there. It's almost tangible, and it's that window into the past. And because of that, people really have a really close personal relationship, even without any formal archaeological training. But at the same time, and somewhat paradoxically, there's a lot of misunderstanding about what archaeology is and what archaeologists do. And in the popular mind, archaeology seems to be some kind of amalgamation of Indiana Jones and dinosaurs. And in some respects, that couldn't be farther from the truth. I mean, don't get me wrong, archaeologists are human, and I'm pretty sure the majority of them agree that both dinosaurs and characters like Indiana Jones are awesome. It's just not archaeology. I mean, I already said that archaeologists study the material and biological remains of human society. Not only are dinosaurs not human, not only did they not have human-like societies, but they didn't even coexist with humans. Unless you want to make the stretch that birds are dinosaurs, which is technically true. No human ever coexisted with dinosaurs. And I don't think when thinking dinosaurs, you're not thinking of chickens poking around my backyard and crapping all over the place. I don't think that's what people think of when they think of dinosaurs. So humans and dinosaurs didn't coexist. And Indiana Jones, even though his character's job is an archaeologist, he's not an archaeologist. Indiana Jones is no more an archaeologist than Superman is a mild-mannered reporter for the Daily Planet. It's a convenient cover story, but not really. I mean, Indiana Jones is kind of a cross between an action hero and what archaeologists would call a pot hunter, which is sort of antithetical to archaeology. It's the theft and destruction of antiquities. And really, the only true sense in which Indiana Jones is like real-life archaeologists is when you're watching the movies and he walks into one of his classrooms and all of his students start like fanning themselves and swooning. But the same could be true of anyone teaching anthropology, because the anthropologist is just that awesome. It's not unique to archaeology. That said, I am not an archaeologist. I'm trained in archaeology. I know a lot about archaeology. I've done a small amount of work in an archaeological capacity, but I wouldn't consider myself an expert by any stretch of the imagination. So, in the interest of sort of humanizing the people that do this actual work and showing that they're a lot like everybody, and in the interest of it always being a good idea to consult with people who are an expert on the thing that you're talking about before you form your opinion, I reached out to Dr. Pierre Morenon, who is an archaeologist at Rhode Island College, and he's actually the guy that taught me archaeology in the first place. So that being said, I headed on over and sat down and hung out with him and talked a bit about his perspectives on archaeology and what he's done in the field and what archaeology means to him.
So my name is Pierre Morenon, and I'm an archaeologist. I work at Rhode Island College. I work in the Anthropology department. I've worked in the Anthropology department here at Rhode Island College since 1978, 79. I started as an archaeologist in 1968, so that's a long time ago.
Yeah,
that's 50 years ago. So for me, archaeology is a discipline that is primarily concerned with human beings and human behavior. I do think that archaeology is, largely correctly positioned as a discipline that studies human activity, looking at particularly behaviors in the past, and has the particular characteristic of using the material record, using the physical material record, whether it's artifacts or the products of human activity. It can be almost anything. Since 2001, I have been really engaged in this study of the state, home, and school. And I think it's also an interesting way to introduce what archaeology is about. Typically, if you were to think about archaeology, you would think about something like this. This is a beautiful arrow point. Actually, it's a spear point. We excavated this in 1991, 1992 down in southern Rhode Island. This was a small project that I did actually as a summer project with a group of students, and we excavated basically a lithic workshop, a stone tool production area where native peoples manufactured lots of objects like this. We've got several of them exactly in this shape and form that we found, and it was a wonderful little project. So this is a 3,500-year-old tool that it's made out of a kind of material you sort of wonder about it. It's rather soft. I'm not sure it was a functional object. I'm sort of thinking that this might be more ceremonial in its. The thing about this material, which is called an argillite, it fractures in a particular way, and if you know how it behaves, you can you can just it's like making pancakes, and that's what they did. These are elongated flakes that were side struck off of these cores that were particularly shaped. They just side strike and they produce these long flakes, and then they just retouch around the edges. But the State Home and School project, this is the sort of object that we find. This Tootsie toy truck. This truck was the first object that I found on this project in 2001. I think the actual date was April 5th, 2001, and it's a project that we were challenged to do by a former Rhode Island College student who was working in DCYF. He said, Rhode Island College, you own this property, you ought to go out and do something with it, you ought to look at it. And so because he said I ought to do something, I said, well, I'll go and take a look. And I went out, and 15 minutes into my first look on the State Home and School property, I found this truck sitting on the ground in the woods under a tree that was 12 feet around, and I knew it hadn't moved, that tree hadn't moved. And so this whetted my interest in studying it, and we started studying, and it has turned out to be a wonderful place. So this doesn't look like a very fruitful place for archaeology, I would guess. You've got all these modern buildings and all of this development taking place here, but it is. This is the part of what was called the Children's Center, and is part of a historic property on Rhode Island College campus. Today what we see is a college campus, but in 1950 what we're looking at here is the place where young children would have been kept in custody by the state, and it occurred on this spot in this area for about 100 years. So why don't we go in and take a look at this building, not as a 1950s brick building, but as an archaeological site. And we've got some offices here now, but 50 years ago this would have been offices with state workers, largely social workers would have spent 8 hours working on their time, and this is where the kids would have come in, and off to the side would be the rooms that they slept in. And each of these rooms would have been a resident for 2 or maybe 3 children. If you go into them now, you don't get a sense of that, but in this space here, you can sort of see where off to the side there would have been built-in closets, and then you would have had a couple of bunk beds and a few bureaus, and so you'd have a couple of children in here. You notice that when you look at the walls in here, you don't see any light fixtures, no switches. So if you come on the outside, you see where the light switches are. So when the children were put to bed and the lights were turned off, that was it. They had no way of turning those lights back on. They were in here for the night, for sure. So here's a pattern that is odd. I mean, this is, I'm about a little over 6 feet, so you can see that this would have been quite an obstacle for a little child to turn on and off. This closet, we have some oral history about, some stories, and it's a supply closet. It was a closet back in the 1950s, but it was also a place where a child would be placed if they misbehaved. And so we have a number of people who've come back and talked about this as a part of their memory. It's not a very big space to be placed. I would imagine, I'm just guessing here, but I would imagine these doors have changed and that there wasn't any way of getting out. So we're in the basement here of Building 6. This would have been more of a utility space with place. They would have had maybe a dining area, and they might have had a couple of play areas or work areas. But what I want to focus on is this area over here. Here's a light switch, which again just turns on the interior. So this space now is used for electronics, computers, and information, but this would have been a detention room. This would have been a room that children were closed in. So you would have had a bed in here, and they would have been put in here. And locked in space, and lights could be turned on and off. So this is really like solitary confinement, and I think it's pretty scary. The thing that's really interesting to me as an archaeologist is not only the space, but this was part of the design of the building. When they built the building, they intentionally put this in. This is not an afterthought, this is an intentional design. So if you think about all of these brick buildings on the East Campus with these, probably they all had detention rooms in them. And that is all purposely done in the 1950s. Yeah, this isn't ancient history. This is part of childcare in a custodial institution of that time period. In the 1970s, when the press got hold of this and started writing about it, they were really pretty incensed about it. But this is part of the history of the state home, unfortunately, from its beginning. We have records in 1890 that children were put into spaces like this in these wooden buildings, and that just carries all the way through. So 100 years of this kind of treatment. Again, for children who they perceived as problem children or misbehaving. This is how you were punished.
So that is one anthropologist and one archaeologist's view on what archaeology is and what it is that archaeologists are up to. Now obviously, we're not everyone in the field. Any archaeologist is going to bring their own personal background and their own particular fields of study and interest into their discussion of archaeology. But Dr. Morenon has had more than 5 decades of experience, not only working out in the fields and digging holes and getting dirty, not just writing and publishing in the field, but also teaching the new generations of archaeologists. So more than 50 years of doing that, it's difficult to find more of an expert perspective on the field of archaeology. So, all that having been said, that is what archaeology is. So I hope that you've enjoyed the video. I hope you enjoyed Dr. Morenon and him taking time out of his schedule to meet with me and tell you about some cool stuff. If you enjoyed the video, please click like. If you want to be notified when Pedal Powered Anthropology posts more stuff like this, or more stuff not like this, click subscribe. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions, if you want me to flesh out any topic further, or if you want to argue with me that archaeologists do indeed study dinosaurs, you can get in touch with me with comments. You can email me at anthrospin@gmail.com, or you can tweet me at anthrospin. And as always, thanks for watching.